This Russian female prison is so bad that inmates would slit their wrists and swallow nails just to avoid being sent there. In another female prison in Uzbekistan, pregnant inmates are forced to terminate their pregnancies just so it doesn't affect their ability to work. These details might sound like something from a horror movie, but it's just a fraction of what goes down in some of the most brutal female prisons. In this video, we have compiled a list of many more female prisons that are so bad inmates have concluded they're worse than death. And the first on this list is HMP Bronzefield. This UK prison is one of Europe's largest women's prisons. Don't allow its size to fool you because it's not winning any Best Place to Stay awards. This facility was specifically set up to house the most dangerous of female offenders, from serial killers to terrorists, and let's just say, folks who wouldn't think twice about making you disappear. But the thing is, it's not just the hard-hitting criminals that make Bronzefield a place worse than death. It's the living conditions in the prison itself. Don't take my word for it. Let's talk about Natasha Chin's experience instead. So, Natasha arrived at this prison in 2016 and was dead in 2 days. Why? Well, Natasha had a medical issue that made her vomit nonstop for 9 hours, but no one gave her the medical attention she needed, so she kicked the bucket. And it's not only Natasha who got to see the bad side of the HMP Bronzefield prison. Many pregnant women in the prison also got an unfair share of the horrifying living conditions in that hellhole. For example, Rihanna Cleary, an 18-year-old, had to give birth right there in her cell. No medical help, no support, just her and the walls closing in. Cleary stayed in labor for more than 12 hours without any sort of medical attention and had to use her teeth as some sort of scissors to sever her child's umbilical cord. By the time anyone even came to offer any medical help, the newborn baby died. Now, if you thought Bronzefield was bad, just wait until you hear about what goes down at Lowell Correctional Institution. With over 2,696 female inmates as of 2015, Lowell Correctional Institution is the largest prison for women in the United States. Lowell seems to be the exact opposite of a correctional facility because it has been consistently associated with overcrowding, horrendous living conditions, inmate abuse, and sexual abuse, to mention a few. In the prison, it is rampant for corrections officers to abuse their powers. A former inmate, Ginger Oman, stated that the frequent and illegal sexual relationships with officers at Lowell developed mainly as a form of exchange for contraband like cigarettes, which can be worth over $400 a pack behind bars.
And they're laughing their ass off the whole time. Oh, this chick just gave me fellatio for a pack of cigarettes, cost me $3. And then we're in the dorm laughing at him. Oh, you know, all I had to do was 2 minutes, it was disgusting, and then I got $400.
And any inmate who dared to speak up about this mistreatment faced even more terrifying consequences like physical threats, isolation, and being deprived of basic necessities like food, soap, and even sanitary napkins. Take, for example, a 52-year-old woman named Cheryl Weimar, who fell on the bad side of the corrections officers and was beaten so brutally that she was paralyzed from the neck down.
All I see in front of me is a brick wall. A brick wall. And all I remember is my head went flying through.
Lowell is definitely a place you'd never want to find yourself, but when it comes to the horrors of this next prison, it's like comparing a bad dream to a full-blown nightmare. Heilongjiang Women's Prison. This prison has earned itself a nickname, the Cemetery of Falun Gong Ladies. The horrors women in this prison face are beyond anything imaginable. They face brutal conditions that seem to have been designed to break both body and spirit. One inmate, Liu Jinping, a 43-year-old Falun Gong practitioner, was arrested at home and thrown into this hellhole because she refused to give up her beliefs. Liu was beaten, tortured, and forced to sit on a tiny, hard bench for hours, to the point where she developed open sores. Liu protested by going on a hunger strike, which made the guards more determined to make her life miserable. Even something as basic as using the bathroom became a torture session. Another inmate at the prison gave an account of the 6 torturous years she spent in the prison. She recounted how she was locked in a tiny cell for almost 2 months, handcuffed to a metal ring cemented to the floor. She was also handcuffed with her hands behind her back for a year and a half, hung by the handcuffs, forced to stand outside in the freezing cold, and beaten repeatedly. In the prison, some other inmates reported that they were under constant surveillance, even in the restroom. They were only allowed to urinate during the day and were only allowed bowel movements between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., and if they step out of line, they're beaten again. As cruel as the treatment in Heilongjiang Women's Prison was, it's nothing compared to this next prison that makes inmates ask for death. Parapana Agrahara Central Prison. This facility, also known as Bengaluru Central Prison, was originally built with male prisoners in mind. Its structure reflected that, making it even tougher for the female inmates who have to adapt to an environment that wasn't really intended for them in the first place. Parapana Agrahara is infamous for its overcrowded and dilapidated conditions, cramming a bunch of people into a space meant for way fewer, and then making basic necessities like clean water and sanitation in short supply. Life in this prison for pregnant women is far from being a bed of roses. These women have to adjust to a cramped space with just 2 bed sheets and 1 pillow to sleep on the floor, eating the same food every day, and filled with despair, anxiety, and tension, all these while being pregnant. Due to this kind of living environment, some of the pregnant women had to deal with miscarriages and premature deliveries. Parapana Agrahara Central Prison is overcrowded, but in this next prison, deadly riots that end up in the death of scores of inmates are a common occurrence. La Mesa Prison. Located in Mexico, La Mesa Prison is regarded as the most notorious prison in Latin America. This prison is overcrowded, which means that personal space is a luxury that's in short supply. Originally, the prison was built to accommodate a maximum capacity of 2,000 inmates. In the 1990s, there were a total of 2,500 inmates. By the 2010s, the total number had increased to over 7,000, making the entire prison unbearable. But that's not the worst challenge inmates face in the prison. Inmates also have to deal with corrupt prison officers, as guards at La Mesa have been reported to take bribes. In exchange for some cash, prisoners could get released or at least score themselves some better conditions. For example, in 2002, the police had to step in and demolish a luxury condo that had been built inside the prison. So, while most of the prisoners were crammed into overcrowded cells, a few were living it up in their private condos. Apart from corruption, the prison also has its fair share of violence. In September 2008, several riots occurred, which led to the death of over 20 inmates. After hearing about the intense chaos at La Mesa, you might be wondering if other prisons have faced similar turmoil. Well, in a prison where 80 to 90 people share just 30 square meters, chaos cannot be avoided. Kachun concentration camp. Most of the inmates in this prison are political prisoners, theoretically supposed to be re-educated through hard labor, but the sentences for the prisoners are usually ridiculously long, and the conditions are so extreme that many don't make it through. The camp operates like a nightmarish factory zone. Inmates are essentially slave laborers, cranking out goods under grueling conditions. They work in shoe, leather, rubber, and clothing factories within the camp, often clocking in 18-hour days. If they fall short of their production quotas, they might get stuck working overtime. Prisoners in this camp are crammed into flea-infested rooms with 80 to 90 people sharing just 30 square meters. Access to toilets is minimal, one for about 300 inmates, and showers are rare. Food is served in very small portions, and if an inmate breaks the rules, her ration is further reduced, causing some prisoners to eat raw rats to survive. In this prison, inmates are usually severely punished. They are locked in tiny cells for days, beaten, kicked, and whipped. When the inmates get pregnant, they are forced to have abortions, and babies are frequently killed after birth. The conditions were so harsh that between early 2020 and August 2022, around 40 out of 500 female inmates serving life sentences died. With such harrowing tales from Kachun, it's hard to imagine that other prisons could be just as brutal. But next, let's take a closer look at this prison where inmates regularly have to deal with sexual violence and drug use. El Buen Pastor Women's Prison. This facility, also known as the Good Shepherd, is located in Bogota, Colombia. Despite its name, nothing is comforting about this place. It's infamous for its harsh living conditions and extreme overcrowding. Originally, cells were designed to hold just 2 inmates, but now you'll find anywhere from 10 to 20 women crammed into a single cell. According to Daza Quintero, whose mother served time there, sexual violence and drug use are common occurrences in the prison. Corruption runs deep, with guards and inmates often engaging in illicit activities. There's also a social hierarchy among the inmates, with the top spots occupied by those with powerful connections. But it's not only corruption that makes this prison dangerous. Sexual violence also adds to the mix. In this prison, women rape other women. Some inmates are only allowed outside their cell for 1 hour per day, and if you're looking for some fresh air outside that time, you better make sure you have a medical emergency. In the Good Shepherd prison, 10 to 20 women share a single cell, but in this next prison, something even worse happens. HM prison style. When ranking the prisons with the highest suicide rates in England, HM Prison Style will top the list, having had nothing less than 11 suicides since 2007. In December 2020, 18-year-old Annalise Sanderson was found dead in her cell, making her the youngest female to commit suicide in HMP Style. Stories leading up to the event of the arrest of 18-year-old Annalise stated that she was arrested for stealing a pair of shoes and assaulting workers who intervened. It was recorded that on the day of her arrest, she poured petrol on herself and tried to drink it. Instead of offering her a psychiatric checkup, she was sentenced to 12 months at Style.
40% of the population will have some sort of mental health issue. Of that group, around about 15 to 20% will have a serious diagnosable mental health issue.
Many of the women in Style are dealing with drug addiction and trauma, but instead of trying to help them, the prison condition only makes things worse. The situation in Welikata Women's Prison is troubling, but in this next prison, where the spaces are overcrowded by over 220%, life is definitely a living hell. Welikata Women's Prison. We are treated as far less than human. These words came from one of the inmates at this facility. Welikata isn't just any prison, it's the largest maximum security prison in Sri Lanka. This prison is one of the most overcrowded, with over 220% overcrowding according to reports. Over 150 inmates sleep in a single cell, so the spaces are cramped and there is barely any room to breathe. In addition, the prison is short-staffed. The officers are overworked, underpaid, and stuck in a tough, even dangerous environment. And what do the officers do? They vent their frustrations on the inmates. Now, in this prison, about 64% of these women are first-time offenders. You'd think they might get some kind of different treatment, right? Nope, everyone gets thrown in together, whether the inmate has murdered someone or simply refused to pay a loan. As for mental health support, well, it's practically non-existent. The heat doesn't help either. The prison has no air conditioning, just some fans that seem to do nothing but push the hot air around. For many of these women, it's a long, exhausting journey with no real light at the end of the tunnel. And if that wasn't enough, the prison is also infested with rats, flies, cockroaches, and bed bugs, all due to the lack of a proper garbage disposal system. If the harsh reality of Welikata Women's Prison surprises you, then your jaw will surely drop when you hear about this next prison, where there is a sign in front of the prison that literally reads, "Welcome to Hell." IK-14 Prison. The fact that women condemned to serve time in IK-14 prison take extreme measures to avoid going there, including slitting their wrists and swallowing nails, is a testament to the fact that the prison is a formidable and dreaded one. This dreaded prison is located in Russia's central region of Mordovia. At the entrance, there is a sign that says, "Welcome to Hell." The situation in this prison is so bad that inmates regularly say, "If you haven't done time in Mordovia, you haven't done time."
They have quotas, and if you don't make your quota, then you're invariably punished, and those punishments could be official, like being put in solitary confinement, or unofficial, where they have other prisoners beat you up for not making the quota.
In a letter published by one of the inmates in the prison, she complained about the slave labor conditions at the prison, as well as the abuse faced by prisoners. She wrote that women were forced to work 16 or 17 hours a day with 1 day off every 8 weeks. Some prisoners slave for hours at sewing machines in a rat-infested sweatshop until they lose their fingers. The brutality at IK-14 isn't just about the harsh conditions. The prison officers are also very effective at shutting down any attempts to oppose them or expose their cruelty. When any prisoner dares complain about her inability to continue with the work assigned to her or disobeys a prison guard, she will be made to stand in the spot outside where it is minus 20 degrees Celsius. Now, if you think IK-14 is intense, wait until you hear about Julia S. Tutwiler Prison. Located in Wetumpka, Alabama, this facility has been around for a while, since 1942, but this women's prison is known for more than just its age. If you've heard of Tutwiler, you probably know it's been in the news for all the wrong reasons, but what's particularly horrific about the prison is that its overcrowding has led to some pretty unsanitary conditions. The beds there are so rusty that the rust smears the inmates' bed sheets. But it's not only the best that's bad, the tiles are also rotted, and the ceilings are either sinking or completely making it a living hell whenever rain pours. The prison is filled with cobwebs and thick dust on the walls and windows, and there are holes so big that roaches and rats regularly come to visit while inmates are taking a shower. But it gets worse. The prison has a long history of horrible medical care for its inmates. An inmate had a medical condition that caused her to lose so much blood that she neared heart failure. But instead of attending to her, the prison doctors just didn't care and even gave her the wrong medication. Inmates also recount several instances of inmates bullying other inmates, guards soliciting sex from inmates, and inmates inmates being beaten, assaulted, and cursed at on a daily basis, while Julia S. Tutwiler Prison paints a grim picture of what life can be like behind bars. Can you imagine what it'll feel like if all the female offenders, regardless of the severity of the crimes they commit, are crammed into one single place? Well, that's what life feels like in this next prison. Qarchaq Women's Prisons. Qarchaq Women's Prison, sitting in the barren desert of Iran, has earned itself a nickname that says it all: torture chamber. The prison was originally an industrial chicken farm, so it lacks cells and other basic structures that are to be contained in a prison. But what makes this place live up to such a grim title? Well, let's see. This women's prison is packed to the brim. It houses over 2,000 inmates, which is more than double its capacity, leading to extreme overcrowding. And inmates here aren't separated by the severity of their crimes. Everyone just lives together as one big unhappy family. The lack of segregation breeds violence among the prisoners, and it doesn't help that medical services are scarce or non-existent. The conditions are harsh. Inmates face all sorts of torture, including sexual violence. On top of that, prison staff resort to beatings, further pushing inmates towards psychological distress. If anyone dares to complain about the terrible food or the lack of medical care, they're punished by being thrown into solitary confinement. It's like a never-ending cycle of misery. Speaking of food, it's a constant struggle. Inmates are served the same monotonous meal every single day, which leads to severe vitamin deficiencies and overall poor health. The state of this prison reached its lowest on June 7, 2022, when sewage overflowed in several yards of the prison. This, combined with the already existing heat and overcrowding, attracted swarms of insects and led to respiratory difficulties among the detainees. In Chikurubi, the conditions are harsh, but what happens when all kinds of criminals, from serial killers to petty thieves, are crammed in one single general prison? I guess we're about to find out in this next prison. Neve Tirza Women's Prison. Neve Tirza Women's Prison is located in Israel and is the only women's prison in the country. So that means that all women who have committed a crime, from serial murderers to petty thieves, are all crammed within the walls of the same prison. The physical conditions were not the only problem in Neve Tirza. The cells are infested with cockroaches, and there is a serious bedbug problem, and no one can really protect you from the crazy inmates in the prison. But that may only be a little compared to the challenge that the strictness of the prison causes to the inmates. For example, in a single cell there are 6 to 8 prisoners. There's a terrible stench in the air, and the prisoners spend 23 hours all crammed in that space with only 1 hour to move around. This has led most of the inmates to suffer from varying degrees of mental illness. Again, women in the prison are subjected to various harsh treatments. After a riot in the prison, some riot police sprayed tear gas into the cells of some prisoners, making many of them faint. Many of them were beaten, while some others were tied to the bed with restraints and chains that caused their hands to swell and caused difficulties in breathing. The situation at Neve Tirza Women's Prison is definitely extreme, but it's nothing compared to this next prison, where the bunks of inmates are so high that the inmates' heads touch the ceiling. Bandiup Women's Prison. In this prison, the situation is so bad that female inmates would prefer to share a cell with their male counterparts that stay in the prison. The Bandiup Female Prison operates as a maximum security facility. It puts the inmates in stringent situations, even though, interestingly, only about 10% of the women there are classified as maximum security. Now you might be asking, why is Bandiup considered so harsh? Well, to start with, overpopulation is one big reason. The prison, which was originally built to accommodate 220 people, now houses over 402 inmates. There, inmates were sleeping on mattresses on the floor because the prison was packed way beyond its capacity. Extra beds were crammed in, and in some cases they were so close to the ceiling that inmates couldn't sit up properly. Ceiling lights were just a few centimeters away from the inmates' heads. To top it off, there were no chairs or desks in the cells, so sitting comfortably wasn't really an option. The Bandiup Women's Prison houses over 400 inmates in one space, but this next prison makes life a living hell for its over 7,000 inmates. Pollsmoor Prison. Pollsmoor Prison is known for housing some of South Africa's most dangerous criminals. The prison was originally designed to hold a maximum of 4,336 inmates, with 1,278 staff members to manage them. But now, this facility houses over 7,000 inmates, and that number keeps growing daily. Inmates have continuously complained about the inhuman situation in the prison. Because of overcrowding, over 100 women are usually crammed into a room that barely allows for air circulation, leading to regular tensions between the inmates. The mattresses are stinky, the rooms have no working toilet, the sinks are clogged and have only cold water. To top it off, sheets and blankets crawl with lice, and the cells are overrun with cockroaches. According to normal protocol, South Africa's Correctional Services Act requires health checks for prisoners upon admission, including tests for contagious diseases. However, according to reports, these women weren't getting their annual checkups, leading to a wide spread of diseases in the prison. In Pollsmoor Prison, overcrowding only means that there are regular tensions and fights between the inmates. But in this next prison, the overcrowding is so serious that inmates regularly experience seizures from the heat. Indiana Women's Prison. The Indiana Women's Prison is a maximum security facility and is the oldest and pioneer adult facility for females in the United States. In this prison, inmates are locked down for 23 hours a day without any contact whatsoever with the rest of the institution. The facility has a capacity of more than 700 inmates housed in 7 freestanding buildings known as cottages. 3 to 4 women share cells that do not have air conditioning, running water, or a toilet. To many of the inmates, even dogs are being treated better than them. Most female prisons had the first and primary complaint of overpopulation, but overpopulation is just a small challenge compared to the extreme heat the inmates in this prison face. In March 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was raging in full force, prison officials began restricting inmate gatherings to combat COVID-19. Guards started closing and locking the doors to the cells, cutting off any air circulation from the hallway. But what originally started as a protocol to reduce the spread of COVID-19 inside the Indiana Women's Prison has now turned into dire and inhumane conditions where inmates were forced to remain behind locked doors in their stifling quarters, begging to use the bathroom or to get cool water to drink. Now, ordinarily, the temperature outside these cells is 90+ degrees. This, combined with the overcrowding inside the cells, has made the heat reach unbearable levels. Due to the heat, various inmates often pass out while some others experience seizures without any medical attention to cater to them. Last on today's list is a female prison in Uzbekistan where pregnant inmates are usually pressured to terminate their pregnancies just so they can continue working. Tashkent Women's Prison. This prison is located in Uzbekistan, and here life is horrific for the inmates, and even much more than regular inmates, horrific for pregnant inmates. In the prison, it's a common occurrence to hear terrible cries from many of the prison cells due to the horrific living conditions. Inmates regularly experience different forms of sexual violence, including gang raping and torture by prison guards, while they're coerced into remaining silent. But it doesn't end there. Those who dare to speak out against the system are beaten with truncheons and suffocated using plastic bags. It gets even worse for pregnant women and mothers. Imagine being pregnant and having to work until the day you give birth just so you can afford basic things like food and hygiene products. Well, that's the life inmates in the prison live. When it's time to have their babies, they're taken to a hospital that's about 10 kilometers away, and if anything goes wrong during childbirth, like complications, they're left on their own, and the prison provides no care for them afterward. Because of the heartbreaking conditions, many women don't even tell the hospital they're pregnant during the first 12 weeks. Why? Because the prison staff pressure them to terminate their pregnancies so they can keep working. And when the mothers eventually give birth, life doesn't get any easier. They barely get to see their children, usually just 1 hour a day, and many times when they see their children, they always have bruises from the prison staff beating them. With this, we've come to the end of today's list. If you found this video interesting, click on any of the cards on the screen for more interesting videos.